All right, even California. Welcome, everyone. All right, so we're going to get started. People are telling us where they're from in the Q&A box. You can keep doing that. We'd love to see where you're from. But we're going to get started. We're going to talk about from assessment to action, empowering insights from the experts. I'm going to introduce my amazing people on the call here today. First, we have Dr. James Partington. He is a licensed psychologist and has over 50 years of experience working with children with developmental disabilities. He's internationally recognized as a leader in the field of behavior analysis with expertise in language-based interventions. He's known for his work in teaching parents and professionals about practical and evidence-based procedures necessary for effective educational interventions. He is the author of The Assessment of Language and Learning Skills Revised, the ABLLS-R. He's also the author of Learning to Motivate, Getting Started, and Success on the Spectrum. He's also the co-author of The Assessment of Functional Living Skills, the AFLS, and now CentralReach has both of these assessments, the ABLLS-R and the AFLS, connected into one assessment that we're calling CR assessments. We're so excited to have these assessments together digitally finally. I started working with Jim in 2003. It seems like so long ago and just yesterday all at the same time. But I'm so fortunate to know Jim. I'm always in awe of him when I see him working with the kids. I'm so fortunate to know him. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about this workshop and working with this team to get some information out to people that hopefully will help them do a great job when they're working with families and kids. So happy to be here.
Yeah, yes. And we also have Tammy Frazer joining us today. Tammy is the CEO and clinical director of On Solid Ground. She's passionate about helping children, parents, and individuals better understand learning and behavior. She has developed and presented numerous ABA-based training and education workshops to families, centers, and organizations throughout Ontario. She's the author of the curriculum that we're going to be talking about today, called the ABLLS-R Skills Acquisition Program Manual. I've been emailing Tammy. I was looking back in my inbox since 2015. So I'm so excited to get to know her better on screen live. So welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Autumn. It's exciting to be here. It's really great.
Good. And my name is Autumn Bailey. I'm a district success manager here at CentralReach, and we're so excited to get this webinar started. So a little housekeeping before, please use your Q&A button. There's so many people using it already, so thank you so much. But keep it open for questions that you may have. You can add them in there, and then we will answer them as we go. Or we'll also hopefully have some Q&A time at the end as well. The recording will be sent in a follow-up email, but please allow 2 to 3 business days for the video to process, and then we will send it to you. So far, our agenda today, we're going to go over the history of Jim and Tammy meeting together. We're going to go over Tammy's story, how the ABLLS-R Skill Acquisition Program was started, how she developed it. We're going to talk about what to do after you assess. And then we're going to go through a demo of the curriculum within CR assessments. We'll jump into the platform and show you how it works. Okay, so Dr. Partington, we all know and love the ABLLS-R. We're so happy that you've developed this magnificent tool to help us find skills that are so useful for our kiddos with basic language and learning needs. So the ABLLS-R is now within CR assessments like we talked about before. I have a 2-part question. Can you give us an overview of the ABLLS-R for some people listening who may just be learning about the assessment? And then can you also give us your thoughts of the importance of this tool within clinics and schools? We have so many people that are BCBAs and also people working in schools. So both of those locations would be great.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Maybe we can go on to the next screen here if that would work.
Sure.
I can take a look at that and show people about the ABLLS grid. If you don't know about the ABLLS, it's really important to understand what's in it. And basically what I did a number of years ago, back in the early 90s, started developing it, was take a look at all the different skills that children needed to be able to function well. And at the same time, I had my own 2 children, and they were under 5 years of age. And I was watching as my son started getting ready for kindergarten. And when you take a look at a typical 5-year-old child, what do you see? You see these kids that are really, really bright. They can answer questions. They ask questions. They talk about their experiences. They understand what you're saying to them, and they know certain expectations about how they're supposed to behave under different conditions. And so when you have a typical 5-year-old child going to kindergarten, they're little geniuses. They're ready. They're like a sponge. They can learn so well. And so I started taking a look at, what are all the skills that my kids were developing and their friends had developed by the time they're 4 or 5 years of age. And then I looked at all the kids that I was working with in my school that I started, the STAR school, stood for Strategic Teaching and Reinforcement Systems, and strategic teaching is the key issue. We've got these kids with developmental delays, and you really need to make sure that, we teach them the skills that are going to allow them to learn more skills on their own, because that's what happens with typical children. They start putting together all these different basic language and learning skills, and all of a sudden, they're understanding what's going on around them, and they're learning just by watching and listening to what's happening around them. You don't have to teach them each of these specific skills. They just start picking it up like a sponge. And so the idea behind the ABLLS-R was to pick out these skills that are really fundamental, that really allow these children to start learning from their everyday interactions with others. And what I wanted to do was measure not only did they have the skills, but in many cases, wanted to catch the emergence of these skills. And so that's how the ABLLS was designed. And so when you start looking at the grids that's in front of you there, you'll see that there's these columns of lines going across, and those are all individual skills. And so, for instance, like in receptive language skills, for instance, and notice that I used the word receptive language. I use words that typical parents, teachers, speech and language pathologists use. I don't want people to have to learn our vocabulary to be able to understand the concepts that we're trying to teach. So we have 57 skills in the receptive language skills, and you can actually measure the development of those skills and see how any particular skill is developing over time and which skills are developing over time. And all of the skills were put in order from simpler to more complex. So when you start at the bottom of the columns, those are simpler skills that are often mastered earlier than those skills that are higher up on the columns there. And so the idea here is to provide a way, criteria to measure exactly what a child can and can't do, so that what we can do is all see where the gaps are in their learning. And what we want to do then is have the parents, teachers, and every professional who's working with the child be on the same page. We want them to all understand what the child can and can't do, so that we all can target the next set of skills to work on. And why this is so important, I'm going to spend a little time on this. Years ago, I was invited to consult on a little girl at 24 months of age. And what was really interesting was she'd already been working with a behavior analyst. And when I got there, the mother and father told me about the objectives that they were given for the little girl. And here's a nonverbal little girl who can't imitate, didn't understand anything anybody was saying to her. And basically, they had 3 objectives for her. One was to have the little girl stop biting on the mom's shoulder when the mom held her. The other one to have her stop posturing. She would lay on the ground and kind of cross her legs over and kind of stiffen up. And that was the second objective. And the third objective was to toilet train her. Well, anybody who knows about developmental psychology knows that a 24-month-old child is probably not going to be toilet trained already. I mean, there are some exceptions in life, but that was the furthest thing that she needed to work on. She needed to work on imitation. She needed to work on being able to listen to what somebody was saying. She needed a way to communicate things that she wanted. So we had all these basic skills that needed to be developed, but they hadn't even targeted those. They were targeting essentially inappropriate behaviors to work on. And so, I realized that we really needed a guide for people, for behavior analysts who may not have had that much experience in development, child development, parents and teachers, again, all working together. And what the ABLLS-R does, if you look at all the 544 skills from 25 areas, there's 3 sections. There's a basic language and learning skills section. There's also academic skills. There's some self-help skills, which are important for all children. And of course, motor skills, because we're trying to look at a complete package of measuring the skills of children. And so we can now take a look with these grids and then agree on what's the next step. What are the most important skills to teach this child right at this moment and build on existing skills that they already have, such that we get the maximum amount of progress in the shortest amount of time. These kids don't have time to wait for us to figure out what to teach. We need to get in there and start teaching right away and making sure that we're not wasting any time trying to teach skills that the child just isn't ready to learn at this particular moment. So it's kind of a guide to kind of help them. Now, my son is actually a behavior analyst working in the school systems too. He actually worked in my clinic for 3 years with me. So I know he's got some really good skills. But what's interesting is when he goes into the school system, again, it's the same thing. You know, we need to educate the people within the educational systems about what is appropriate type of skills to be working on at any one particular moment. And in fact, at one conference, I was doing a display at a school psychology conference, and a school psychologist actually came up to me and said, you know, Dr. Partington, thank you for doing this. He said, by having these grids available to show parents, we now have a forum for talking about what the child can and can't do and why we need to work on certain things now and not worry about other things until later. So whether it's a home-based therapy, you know, and we want the parents to know what we're working on and why we're working on, you know, this is not something that we use as a profession and say, oh, it's just ours, you know, stand back, let us tell you what to work on. No, we want the parents to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. It's such that they can work together with us as part of the team. Because I found over the years that those kids whose parents have actively become involved in the programming do much, much better than those kids where the parents do not get involved so much. So it's written in parent-friendly language and teacher-friendly language, such that we can all work together, whether in school or in home, to get the best possible outcomes for the children that we're trying to help. So I hope that kind of answers your two questions there, Anna.
Yeah. Yeah. I used the ABLLS-R, as you know, in a paper version. I would have loved it in a digital version, but in a paper version in my school. And I love how, you know, you just can move up the skyscrapers and see the progression. We do have a question, and I know that you can answer this really well, but it says, do the colors represent mastery level? So if you could go over the colors and in the grid, that we have someone asking about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't talk about the coloring. But basically what the grid system does is it kind of gives you a graphic representation of the skills. So for instance, you'll notice on this particular one, this child, the first set of skills that are being mastered are the red ones down at the bottom. So it's kind of progression. It goes from red to yellow to blue. And what it does is it colors in the boxes according to what the criteria are for an item. So for instance, if it's a little small for me here, but if you look at, let me put on my glasses for a quick second.
We actually have someone else asking about those 9 areas. There are 25 areas, but the ones that you can see, there's 3 different grids in the assessment, but they're asking to read the 9 areas aloud, but there are 25.
There are
25.
25. I think we've got another slide in there later on that shows the other 2 sections there. But
yeah,
if you look at this particular one, if you look at the, let's see, it'd be the 3rd column from the right, okay, there is G2, which G is the labeling section, or, you know, technical terms, we call it tacting. I call it labeling in this because that's what everybody's familiar with. You don't have to, parents don't need to learn what a tact is or an interval, really. I mean, try not to do that. But then G2, you see 3 boxes from the left are filled in. Okay, that tells me that the child can label at least 50 common items, but not 100 items well generalized. So, because that's the highest criteria on there, the score of 4 on G2 is 100 items and well generalized. Detecting common objects. Okay, so it fills in and it kind of shows you, but then you see that when the second assessment was done there with filled in yellow, you can see that that G2 went from a score of 3 to a score of 4. So that shows the progress within that particular skill. And it also shows you some other skills that now started to be acquired too since the first assessment. So that's kind of how it works. And then every assessment, you make the change, you you update the grids with a different color, and it then kind of shows you the progress that the child is making, not only on individual skills, but within each repertoire, and then across all of the repertoires too. So it really gives you a fine view of progress in many different dimensions.
Perfect. We have one more question. The highest age of the assessment that would work for a typically developing child. I don't know if you want to run into the neurotypical data that we did, but we do have that question as well.
Yeah, well, you know, what's really interesting is by the time a typically developing child is 4 to 5 years of age, almost all the skills are filled in, or almost all the boxes. The exception is with some of the academic items, such as the math and the reading, for instance, and spelling, because again, a lot of typical children don't start really working that much on, you know, academics like reading and whatnot, or complex or adding and subtracting kind of things until they get to school. And so, but by 4 to 5 years of age, all of the basic language and learning skills sections are mastered, and also the same for the self-help and the motor skills. So those, we have the neurotypical type of data sampling that I did. Actually, Autumn ran the study with me. For years, we were collecting data from typically developing children. And you can actually see that that's been published. Maybe somebody can give them the reference a little later on from that. But it does show that typical kids have mastered these skills by the time they're 4 to 5 years of age. So, you know, if you ask a child who's 4 or 5, you know, what did you do yesterday? Well, I went to grandma's house. Okay, well, what did you do at grandma's house? Well, we baked cookies. You know, they can tell you those things. And you know, can say, you know, why do you want me to do that? You know, so they're asking questions. Who's going? When are we going? You know, why do we have to go? Typical 5-year-old kids can do all that. They're asking for information or demanding for information in a technical sense. They have more extensive interverbals. They're using contractions and conjunctions fluently. Okay, so hope that helps.
Perfect, thanks. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide. The ABLLS-R, this is how it was available in print. So Jim, can you tell us a little bit why you wanted to go digital with this assessment? I'm so excited about it, but maybe tell everyone why we went digital.
Yeah, well, long time ago now, my goodness, it's been ages, it seems like. I decided that, you know, it's nice to have the paper and pencil version, but you know what, if we can get it into an electronic format, and then we can have sharing this information a lot easier with others. We can also generate reports, you know, based on the progress. We have it tracked online, so that, like I say, if I do a lot of consulting in Southeast Asia, and you know, if I have somebody who I'm working with and I can look at their charts online, I can look at the proposed programs that are being written on that program, it makes it a whole lot easier. And then also, when it comes to the parents or teachers or, you know, RBTs, the people who are working directly with the kids, trying to understand what all these different skills are. You know, when you're starting to talk about some of these language skills, you know, people say, well, they know their colors. Well, you know, what does that mean? Do they know them in a receptive way? Can they point to them when you ask them to point to red or something? Can they tell you it's red if they see something that's red? Do they understand that concept of color? Well, now, if you can take examples that are even much more complex in this and show what the skill is supposed to look like when the child is able to do the skill, we actually have videos that we recorded showing what the end result is supposed to look like. And those were put into the electronic version so that, you know, parents could go in and then just click on the video and say, oh, I see, this is some examples of what the child's supposed to be able to do if they're meeting the criteria for this particular skill. So it makes it really easy. And also, for those of you who work in the schools, you know, if ever you're doing a training for teachers or aides in their classrooms or general for the district, you know, you can actually do a nice presentation. Unlike, for instance, if you're trying to teach them about all of the different skills that are incorporated within the imitation section of the ABLLS-R, you can actually go through and play all the little videos for them and say, okay, here's imitation with objects. Here's imitation, you know, of slow and fast movements. Here's one, you know, where you're doing them in sequence and so forth. So you can actually show them the progression of the different types of skills that the typical children or the children that you're working with want to or need to acquire in order to become, a very competent learner. So
I love those videos in the digital version. They're my favorite.
yeah, and generating reports from it too, so it actually can help you, generate a report. So you
Yeah,
don't have to spend
absolutely.
a day writing a report about the kid's skill level if you can, do it from there, and also picking your objective easily and writing your IEP by picking and choosing the objectives you want to work on and then outputting it, and now you've got your IEP for the child. You don't have to spend hours and hours writing them out by hand. Got it there. So that's why I went to the electronic version. And CentralReach is taking it to a new level too by including it, with the AFLS assessment functional living skills, having it all available at once, and even having some more features that they're able to build in with their technical team. So I'm very excited about, how this is all progressing.
Good, me too. All right, so we want to go over the history of meeting with both Jim and Tammy. So can you tell us, how did the both of you meet? I'm not sure who wants to go first, probably Tammy.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give it a go.
Okay.
So I mean, throughout my career, I've attended a number of, different conferences and workshops that Dr. Partington had been doing. It wasn't about 2012, I would say, was my first sort of official introduction in the physical realm. Just at one of the conferences with ABAI. I think it was the launch of the AFLS at that point. So I was really excited, getting my signed copy of the assessment tool. And then it was in about 2015 that I was being supervised by a psychologist here in Ontario. And shout out to Dr. Rebecca Ward. She was the one that had encouraged me to send a sample of some of the program write-ups to Dr. Partington. And I was all nervous and no, how will he take this? They were very gracious. I sent sort of a sample of what I was up to and what I wanted to propose in terms of a manual, and was able to have some initial meetings and discussions about formalizing it as a manual. And I'd say that's sort of how it all kind of took off. So we've had, many contacts throughout the last, I guess, 9 years now. And I can't believe how quickly the time has gone by, and excited now that it's actually becoming more of a digital product. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was exciting, to hear that Dr. Frazer wanted to do something like this, to really make it easy. Because, of course, we want everybody to be on the same page. I can't emphasize that enough. It's really important that when it comes to treatment for children, teaching skills, we really need to make sure we're doing everything right. There needs to be, fidelity in terms of, what people are doing. Are they all working on the same skill the same way? Now, again, if you train loosely, you get some generalization there too. But as Stokes and Bear indicated a long time ago, it's not just about hoping that generalization occurs. You've got a program for generalization. But even more importantly, before you generalize, you got to make sure that the child's acquiring the initial skill to begin with. And so that's where you want to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be presenting the trial, so that, when one therapist is working with the child, it's presented the same way as the next person that's doing it. I mean, we've learned that in our science over the years, that, having that consistency of implementation, we call it fidelity of treatment, really has to be done well. And then you program for generalization based off that. But again, if you just kind of give some instructions, generalized instructions to a therapist, well, teach them to imitate. It's like, well, what do you want me to teach them? To imitate. So, well, that's not good enough. You got to give them here's what I want you to work on. Here's the examples of what I would like them to be able to do when I come back and see you next time. And I want you to use your prompt and your fading of prompts like this and your correction procedures like this. So it's really important to detail it out, not just send somebody off on a mission to do something. And I think that's where, you know, as you start looking at programming, we need to make sure everybody's literally on the same page. They can read the same thing. They can say, wow, this is what we're supposed to be doing. These are the materials we're supposed to be using. This is how we're supposed to teach the skill to begin with. And heck, if it doesn't work, what are we going to do next? You know, when do we throw up a flag and say, this isn't working, we need to alter our plan? So having everybody be consistent is really important. And so I think, you know, having programs, you know, like Tammy's put together was a very valuable contribution, because these are all fundamental skills. And if kids don't learn these skills, they're going to have a heck of a time learning more complex skills that are going to be required to get them along in life. So this is a great contribution.
So happy the both of you met.
Yeah, I'm happy we did too, because I didn't want to spend all that time doing that. I mean, that was more than I Excuse me, too many help. So glad she did.
All right, so now we're going to get into Tammy's story. Can you tell me a little bit about your history in being a BCBA? What led you to pursue a career in behavior analysis?
Sure. So I've been in the autism and sort of the ABA services or developmental disabilities for over 25 years now. I've always had a desire to sort of better understand people. Even as a young child, observing and trying to figure out why people did what they did. And it was I guess back in the 90s in my undergraduate, I remember sitting in a psych class and watching a video of a therapist with a child. And I think it was at that point that I knew that I wanted to become a therapist. I didn't know at the time sort of which aspect of being a therapist or which sort of specialization. So I kind of explored, different avenues, and then having had the opportunity to work both in the public and the private sector here in Ontario, I think that's when I just fell in love with the science of ABA. It made sense to me. It was a framework or a foundation for just truly understanding people, and so it really hit home in that regard. Fortunately, I think it was around 2000, our provincial Ontario autism program was initiated for kids to receive IBI, and part of that initiative was that we were fortunate to have the University of Nevada brought to us in Ontario, and in their mission to increase capacity of BCBAs in Ontario, being able to be part of that cohort was, again, it felt like home. I knew this is what I wanted to do. And so from there, just being involved, working in, again, both private and public sector, and launching out into my own, working independently in about 2007, and then opening up my organization on solid ground in 2012. So that's sort of the history. It just, again, the science of ABA and sort of understanding people and behavior, it really feels like home. So that's my history.
That's perfect. All right, so when you're working on the manual, why did you choose the ABLLS-R for your curriculum? Were you experiencing any barriers after you completed the assessment, and what led you to develop it?
That's really an easy sort of answer. It's all I've ever known, I think, in terms of starting out in the field. It was the assessment tool that our province was using, that, I was working in private sector as well prior. That was the assessment tool that was used throughout the years. It really, it was, I would say, the primary tool in our province. So it while I did sort of dabble and do still, we dabble in different assessment tools based on individual needs. That was sort of part of the reason why I was focused on the ABLLS. And was there a second part to that question?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, the ABLLS-R is my favorite too, so that's what my choice would have been as well.
Yeah. And the way that it's structured, it makes sense, especially when, you know, new therapists are coming to the field and being able to train them on the use of it and sort of understand it a little bit better. So
Yes, perfect. Okay, well, we're gonna move on to your curriculum that we know and love at CentralReach, the ABLLS-R Skill Acquisition Program Manual. This is in book form, but now it is in digitally with NCR assessments. So how long did it take you to develop this?
oh gosh.
A weekend? No.
Yeah,
Well,
couple
yeah.
days.
Yeah, it was very quick. No, many years. So again, with the with working in the autism field in the early 2000s, you know, it really became apparent to me that while there were different approaches to teaching, it was very clear that without having sort of a very clear outline, people would be on different pages, as Dr. Partington was, you know, sharing earlier. And so part of the work that I was doing, you know, even in the early 2000s was writing programs based on the ABLLS and including all of the different components that we'll go through later of the teaching plans. And so those kind of, it was organic over time, in the sense that I was developing them as they were being needed for any of the clients or individuals that I was working with or supervising in their programs. And so it really did start, you know, right in the very beginning, early 2000s. It wasn't until I would say 2015 when I was, you know, when I had finally kind of said, okay, I'm going to reach out to Dr. Partington and see if, you know, this is something he would be interested in, where at that time, I really started to fine tune them and get them all standardized to a degree where, you know, every program sort of laid out in the same way. And so the formatting and the content and the creativity, just sort of thinking of, you know, the different teaching approaches, adding to it, editing, that probably took between 2 to 3 years. So about 2015 with the initial contact with Dr. Partington, and then 2018 was when it was finally finalized and then published. So it was definitely a journey, sometimes backbreaking at the computer, but it was worth it. So
Definitely. Yeah, and we will jump in and you guys will be able to see it live. But before we jump in it, can you tell me sort of any benefits that you realized when you're using this content in the schools and in clinics for professionals and parents? Kind of what's the benefit of it?
I think the feedback that we've received is that it really has allowed, you know, I'd say whether it's a BCBA or senior BCBAs that are overseeing the support that's being provided in the schools, it's really allowed them to focus more on coaching, training, fine-tuning, and development, because the teachers have been able to they've been able to be more independent with setting up a child's program, being able to know what materials to use, you know, what they should prepare for a student. And then I'd say that, you know, being able to have, you know, some of the goals are built into the IEPs. It's really allowed for, you know, the child progress to be monitored, to be shared with families so that they can see, you know, what their child is learning as well. So combination, the consistency with the staff to be able to implement it in a more consistent manner. I think that that's definitely important in terms of the outcomes for the children as well. So those are the key aspects.
Everyone on the same page.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go just a quick trip down memory lane, just so everyone knows kind of where everything came from. So in 1998, the ABLLS was authored by Dr. James Partington and Dr. Mark Sundberg. The assessment of basic language and learning skills revised was authored by Dr. James Partington here in 2006. This is the updated version. It included 68 additional new skills than the original assessment. Then in 2007, the Web ABLLS was created. This is the online use for the ABLLS-R. In 2012, the AFLS was authored by Dr. Partington and Dr. Mueller together. And then in 2018, Tammy developed the ABLLS-R Skill Acquisition Program Manual in book form. In 2019, the AFLS was added online to create the AFLS online assessment, so we could use AFLS online as well. They were two separate websites, the Web ABLLS and AFLS online. In 2021, CentralReach acquired the ABLLS-R, and in 2022, CentralReach acquired the AFLS. Now, in 2024, we've added Tammy's curriculum to our CR assessments platform. We love this digital option, like we've talked about, and we're excited to incorporate Tammy's curriculum as well. Okay, so we've completed the assessment, we've done all the grids. Where do we go from here? This is a screenshot from the ABLLS-R protocol. The first slide, we had just that first grid, and you guys were asking about all of the content areas. This, I mean, it is little, so it's hard to see, but there are 25 content areas within the ABLLS-R. And this specific grid shows this little Mia, she's my little favorite person to talk about, but she's been scored on the ABLLS-R 3 times. So the first time in pink, the second time in yellow, and the third time in blue. So you can see her progression every time she was assessed, what skills that she learned. So Jim, if you could explain a little more in detail, if you're a teacher or BCBA in our audience and you've just administered the ABLLS-R, you're done, you have all the back boxes filled out, so what do you do? Where do you start?
Okay, well, here's where it gets kind of tricky. Okay, so I actually do full webinars on this.
Right.
How do you analyze the data and develop programs? But I will try to give you a quick overview if I can. But basically, you see these black ovals there kind of picking some potential skills above where the child is currently showing existence of certain skills. So like, for instance, if you look at the third from the right on the large one there, again, that's the labeling section or the tacting section. You can see that they've scored some ones that are above the highest scores that the child already has. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to pick all of those. You really have to do a finer analysis. So I always say you look within each repertoire and say, okay, if you're taking a look at labeling, what are some of the next skills that are perhaps easy for them to be able to start working on next? So you look kind of up that way. You don't go all the way up to the top, because like up at the top, for instance, of that column is things like talking about private events, like how they feel, you know, whether they feel happy or sad, do they know emotions, can they tell you about private events like their stomach hurts and whatnot. And a lot of times you'll see a score like this and the parent will come in and say, well, I really need to know if they're happy or sad. I want to be able to identify happy or sad. And it's like, you know, that's really a difficult skill. That's way up here. And they can't even identify these simple things that are right there in front of them. You know, like, you know, if you're holding up and they can't tell you that's a glass, for instance, or there's water in it, like trying to get them to talk about private events is just way out of the league. You know, they're not going to get it. And so the idea is you kind of take a look at some of those next skills in the sequence to see whether or not they might be appropriate to do. That's one area, but then you also have to look across the repertoires. And like I see with this particular child, the skill levels are advancing quite consistently across the different repertoires. Okay, so that all of them are kind of coming up. And so I would then be targeting certain ones that are probably more important at any one point in time. So for instance, I see this child is starting to ask for some things, starting to label some things, starting to receptively identify items. And I'm looking at the imitation section here and say, well, those kind of are ones that I'd be wanting to put more of a focus on than the others. The introverbals, it doesn't make sense to put focus on that, because unless the child has some pretty extensive receptive language skills to understand what you're saying, then how are they going to be answering questions if you ask them about something when they don't even understand the question and they can't label the things that are right there in front of them? How are they going to talk about things that aren't there? And so you start taking a look, you have to know about language development to be able to put an emphasis on that. And then I look at the top right page on the far left, that's your syntax and grammar. Well, if the child's not putting lots of words together, there's no sense in putting a lot of emphasis on that. You teach a lot of the skills that I was mentioning earlier, and then those syntax and grammar skills will start to come as a function of the teaching of the other skills. So you really need to know a little bit about how to, focus your intervention. Like I say, I do a whole day workshop on just that one particular topic. Right. But I think that's generally the idea. Where do you focus? Where do you focus? Okay. You don't go focusing on higher level skills when they don't have the easier skills, and you prioritize based on what you know about which set of skills will give you the most bang for the buck in terms of your teaching. Okay. So I think that's what you have to do. That's how you start.
Perfect. All right. And then we have elements of an effective program.
Yeah.
This is a big topic too, but.
Well, I wrote a book with my son called Success on the Spectrum. And in there, it's basically built around this concept, elements of an effective program, because, as you're working in the field, if you're just starting out, or even if you're have been in the field for a long time, you have to remember that, we have to start by saying, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to give these kids skills to be able to learn without us. Okay. We want them to be able to learn from their everyday interactions. So the first thing we got to do is find out what they can and can't do. We need to track the skills. We need to prioritize the objectives, which is what I was just talking about. And then we have to put together some kind of an intervention where we got the student actively responding and actually being motivated to learn. And that's why, again, my son wrote another book with me, Learning to Motivating to Learn. So all these little pieces fit together if you go through my books. But the bottom line is you got a motivated learner who's ready to come running to you, if you will, to work, and not running away from you. I always say, if the kid's running away from you, you can't teach them very much, you see. And that's where as you start working with the child, you want to make sure that your interactions with them make them want to be with you, so that you can easily teach them the new skills. Instead of saying, go play, is the big reinforcer to get away from you, escape motivated responding. We don't need that. We need kids wanting to be with you. And then we have to practice these skills and teach these skills throughout the day, while they're awake, and then in different environments with different people. And as I mentioned earlier, parents needing to know what we're doing, how we're doing it, and actually being actively involved in the teaching too is really, really important. And I've had parents come to my clinic, Autumn, when you were there working with me, who's been told by people, you just leave us do the teaching, you just be the mom. And it's like, no, moms and dads are teachers. If you have a typically developing child, you're a teacher for that child. And you don't want to take away that role, but you want to make sure that they know what they're doing such that they're successful, because a lot of these parents are really scared because they're afraid they're going to screw their kid up if they try to work with them. But we need to make them feel real comfortable and say, this is just part of natural interactions with your child, and how you can build this in to when you're getting them dressed, bathing them, feeding them, taking them for a walk in the park or playing in the park. Opportunity to teach. So these are the elements of an effective program, and we've got to make sure all of those are incorporated within this. And of course, what the assessment does is gives you that foundation for that first item, which is, can you identify what they need to learn, what they can do, can't do. So we make sure, if we know they can do something, that we actually make sure that we encourage them and get them to use those skills in their everyday activities. So There we go.
Right. I think we're going to jump into a demo of this so Tammy can take us step by step through the curriculum. So I'm going to jump into the platform. I would love to be out. I'm going to log back in. We do have a couple of questions in here, and if we have time, we will answer them at the end, but if not, then we will send the answers a little later. All right, so I'm going to jump into my favorite little Mia. And this is the learner details. This is my favorite option just to look at if I'm not doing any assessments. I can assess up here and I can add an assessment or resume an assessment. But for just looking at all the grids and seeing what's available within them, it is so awesome to just view. Someone asked about the ABLLS-R, the difference between the ABLLS-R and the AFLS. So the ABLLS-R is the basic language and learning skills revised, and this is the ABLLS right here. And then all of these 6 protocols down here are the AFLS, the Assessment of Functional Living Skills. So they're both in here. But right now we're just going to view the ABLLS-R. And if I wanted to flip through the different protocols, I can do so up here. But right now we're going to look at the supporting materials for the ABLLS-R because that's what we are going to talk about today. So if, for instance, I am doing imitation with Mia, I want to know if she can imitate with objects. So I'm going to go to motor imitation, and D1 is motor imitation using objects. I can see the skill details. What is the question? What is an example of this skill? I can watch the video. So there's videos for about 75% of the skills in the ABLLS-R. So we'll watch it real quick because it's short. So this is exactly what Jim was talking about with the videos. If you're interested in seeing how it is assessed or taught, you can see it in the video. It's kind of the perfect situation because this kiddo is very cooperative. But then we have this new teaching plan here, and this is Tammy's curriculum. You can open it for every single skill. So this is, D1. I'm going to open this up. And then I'm going to have Tammy go through all of the things that are in this curriculum for D1, motor with imitation, with objects.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so as Autumn has shared, each of the programs have a similar format or almost identical format in terms of each of the headings. So they're all laid out in the same way with the domain would be at the top. So this is the imitation domain. Each individual task code is according to the assessment, which is the D1, the program name, motor imitation with objects. And then it has the teaching objective, which for the most part, tried to have them operationalized, but there may be further clarifying or operationalizing that would need to be done with your students. There's a section for the materials that are going to be the most ideal materials to use. However, with all of the program write-ups, they're really designed to be a framework. So not necessarily prescriptive, like this is the only thing that you use. It's more of, it's a framework and provides some different ideas or suggestions for how you would set it up. So you really want to be thinking about your learner, what would be appropriate in terms of the materials for them, and then you would include those. So, so I've just given some examples there. There's the teaching setup. So looking at, when could you actually be teaching and how would that look? So some different suggestions around that. Data tracking and number of trials. So again, depending on your student or your learner, you'll really want to look at individualizing it. We've put in there a minimum of 10 trials, but again, you have to really look at your student to know, maybe for this student, they're acquiring skills much more quickly. We're going to set it up with 5 trials. So those individualization aspects are definitely going to be necessary and important. And I'll touch on the student individualization sheet, which is at the end. You'll have your instruction or your SE, how you'll set it up with each of the programs. And then there's a section for the specific teaching step. So Based on your student performance, we talk about doing a pre-test to ensure that, once you're coming in to teach the skill, that it's not something that they actually have now, even though you may have done your assessment. And then sometimes we have those kids or students that suddenly, for whatever reason in the assessment, they were not performing, but now as you're about to teach it, you're suddenly realizing and seeing that they may actually be demonstrating the skill. So we want to look at how we pre-test to ensure we have that clear performance level before we actually jump into the teaching trials. So each of the sections for teaching trials will provide more specific sort of step-by-step guidelines for how you would be sitting or positioned with the student, what the materials will look like in terms of the positioning of them, giving your instruction, what kind of prompting you might use in terms of, using errorless teaching or some alternatives if you're going to use prompt fading within. So it outlines each of the steps and reinforcement and then documenting your trial. So it's almost like a task analysis for how you would run teaching trials. We then have the prompting hierarchy, and within each program, again, these are all going to look very different. So depending on what's going to be most successful for your student or your learner, we've outlined some prompting hierarchies and how you really want to be looking at fading your prompts. There is a correction procedure section. So just ensuring that if you are seeing errors or errors are occurring, that we really look at how we can provide that correction as needed. And then following that are the suggested teaching strategies. So this is probably one of the areas that I've always enjoyed in terms of being creative around how you set up a program. So really trying to think outside of the box that, there are many different ways to teach. And while some variation can be very helpful for some kids, in terms of, planning for generalization, sometimes it can be it can interfere with a child's progress. So really looking at some of those teaching strategies that are going to be helpful for the child, embedding motivating sort of activities or, different means to, have the child want to be there and keep the learning fun and enjoyable. So adding to that as best you can with regard to individualizing it for your students. And then we have the data collection and graphing procedures. So, there'll be variations between trial data versus probe data. We have our mastery criteria or our acquisition mastery criteria to ensure that we're getting, consistent performance across time. And then any revision criteria. So if we're noticing that the student, visual inspection of the data, we're noticing that the student, may not be sort of on that upward trend in their learning, we want to make sure that we're making revisions in a timely manner and not waiting, weeks or months to make that change. The next section is an example. I've provided some suggested teaching targets. So again, you really want to be thinking about what's going to be meaningful for your students and identifying targets that, that would be more appropriate for them. Following that, the baseline procedure actually is what we would have it done sort of in the very beginning to evaluate what their performance is at that sort of initial stage before you start teaching. And we put it at the end because it does tie into the targets on the, on your target list that you might have for your students. So we want to make sure that we're getting a good baseline to determine their performance levels right in the very beginning. Now, from there, you can indicate, the criteria that they meet at baseline. And then the last part is the program individualization steps. And this is the one where, it's really important to be looking at how you're going to individualize this for each student to ensure that it's meeting their needs, it's appropriate to the context for that student and for their developmental level. You can also include any changes that you might make to data collection. So if you are making a change to the number of trials, you want to make sure you're putting that in there so that all people that are working with the student are all, able to see what the individualization steps are for the student, and that we can, our aim is to have everybody be on the same page. So I think that kind of covers everything. I don't know if Dr. Partington, there's anything else that you would add there.
No, I think it's excellent. It's a nice breakdown, and it certainly takes away the excuse from somebody saying, well, I didn't know what to do. It's like, you've got it all right there for them. If you don't know what to do, you can't read. I guess you're not appropriate for running these programs, I guess. But yeah, it makes it all up front for everybody. Parents can look at it too. The parents can read over it and say, oh, I thought it was supposed to be done this way. If they're seeing something that varies from it. And then maybe the therapist will say, yeah, well, the reason why I adjusted it this way is because we were seeing progress in this way. And so I wanted to try to expand it out. Makes sense. All right. But I think it's also sometimes people are going to see something that just doesn't look right. That's not how we wrote it up. That's not how we talked about doing it. Then you can do the correction procedure on the therapist's behavior. So,
yeah.
Oh,
and just to sort of reiterate, each of the programs is really designed to be a framework for teaching. And so keeping that in mind, that while it is, quite, my view clearly laid out, remembering that there might be variation in teaching and setup that you really want to be looking at, and ensuring that the rest of the team is all on board.
Yes. Excellent.
Excellent. Yes. I just want to, we're about a minute left. Oh, I think we're right about time, but I just want to mention that all of the skills have this teaching plan. So if you are in the ABLLS-R and you're looking for a teaching plan for one specific skill, you just go in the supporting materials and find it. We do have a couple questions. We'll get those answered by email. So I want you to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Jim, for being here today. I'm so thankful to have this webinar with you.
Thank you for having us.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, just thank you for having us. And yeah, I really just hope it makes a difference and has an impact on the students and the staff that are implementing it. So
it will.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
It's really important. I think some of the emphasis here, is on teaching the skills to children. But, Tammy just made a very important point there. And that is, you want these people who are coming in who have the heart and they want to be able to help some child develop the skills. And so you want to do everything you can to make them successful so they feel good. So when they go home at night, they can feel good about, the accomplishments that they've been able to create for the child they're working with. And I think that's a really important point to just kind of hit real quickly there. But, we want everybody to be successful so that everybody can share the joy for seeing kids hopefully making maximum progress in their development. And maybe even, some of these kids will, catch up. We know with good teaching conditions at an early age, some of these kids do have the potential to get caught up, but they won't get there if the teaching isn't right. So again, this just kind of helps add to the whole process for the child's development. So really excited to be part of this. And I thank CentralReach for hosting this and making this all happen. Autumn, thank you for moderating this. I mean,
absolutely.
Autumn's an excellent teacher too, by the way. I didn't talk about that. She's a phenomenal teacher. So, you put us all together and we've got a great group here. And I hope that what we've done today is help those people who are here, in this training, get a couple of ideas that may help them be more successful so that you'll feel good about the work you're doing too. So
absolutely.
Shut up and let it go.
Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Bye.